The problem I have with the Democratic candidate is her support for the universal basic income. It's that in terms of relieving poverty, it doesn't work. Yeah, I am vaccinated. I'm triple vaccinated. I even changed companies for my booster because the theory that cross-vaccination is even better. I think the jury is still out on that also, right? So my plan is to collect them all. I may start traveling abroad next year to just try to get some more vaccines. I'm kidding about that, but it could turn out to be a good idea. I really don't know. But I think that's sort of my point, is that I don't know, right? I've had a grand total of one biology class in my lifetime, and I was pretty bad at it, to be frank. Is that I made my decision the same way every American male who's married should. You know, my wife told me to get vaccinated, and so I did. And my doctor, right? My doctor and my wife both told me to get vaccinated, and they're both miles smarter than I am, so I got vaccinated. My problem is the extent to which the government presumes itself to be as smart as my wife or my doctor. And I think that in some cases, we have, as a public policy matter, we can be seen to be overplaying our hand. I don't mind the federal government or the state government making its case, even in some cases creating incentives. Indeed, I think that's the obligation. If you're going to fund the CDC, if you're going to throw money at research, for goodness sake, share it with us, right? And let us know what the recent results are, what you think is a good idea. But at the same time, be candid with us about the state of the science, you know, where we're not sure. Well, I'm not a fan of this idea of you have to get vaccinated or lose your job in New York. Not a big fan of President Biden suggesting that you have to be vaccinated to work for a company with more than 100 people. On the other hand, I do believe that companies, just like individuals, ought to have the right to make up their own mind. You know, this idea of our governor saying a company can't require its employees or its customers, anyone it does business with, to be vaccinated, I think that's an inch too far as well. You know, if a company decides that for whatever reason, and that's an important element, I don't have to know the reason, right? If a company decides, you know, even if they're being dumb, whether they're being dumb or whether they're being smart, it's their decision to make. So if they decide that their employees ought to be vaccinated, I just don't see how the governor can presume the authority to himself to say, no, you can't. But there's a big difference between, you know, Mike Maat saying you ought to be vaccinated and some public official saying, if you don't get vaccinated, I'm going to have you fired. I think that's an important difference. The issue is this. Local governments and state governments collect money for primary and secondary education. That money is made available only to public schools. That mechanism would be flatly illegal restraint of trade in any other industry in the United States, right? You cannot, in any other business, monopolize a locality with only one provider. There is no economic reason, and there is no educational reason, why that money should only be made available to a public school. Indeed, I would argue that it's fairly clear at this point that it is not a coincidence that we consider public schools to be relatively underperforming compared to other industries and compared to private schools, and the fact that they have a monopoly. I don't believe we should any longer tolerate that monopoly. Denying a religious organization who's providing the same service would be a violation of the Constitution. I don't think the government should be in the business of asking, you know, is your school being run by priests or nuns? If the school stinks, I think that the families should have the option of not going there anymore, whether that's a public school, a Catholic school, a hoity-toity private school, or anybody else. But that's not the case today. Today, you have to go to a public school if you can't afford anything else.
How do you deal with, for lack of a better term, execution? I mean, if I'm in your congressional district, and I live in, let me just say, if I live in West Palm, a working class neighborhood,
Which is most of District 20.
what is
Because it is not fair that poor kids, and let's be candid with each other, in District 20, black kids don't have a chance to go to a good school. Poor kids and black kids in District 20 have to go to a crappy school. Broward County public schools are not good. Palm Beach public schools are an inch better, but compared to other schools that are private, compared to other schools that are outside of Florida, compared to other schools that are elsewhere in Florida, they're just not good. And by the way, back to my earlier point, compared to the performance in other industries, objectively, they're not good. But poor kids don't have a choice. Poor kids have to go to a public school. That's not right. We need to make it available so that families can choose what kind of school they want to go to. If you're making $10,000 available for this family to go to a school, why should you then turn around and say that family has to go to the local public school? They should be able to go to any school they want. Now, a lot of folks have said to me, well, we don't have good private schools as an option in Lauderhill, right? That's right, you don't, and that's why. I guarantee, I would bet my house that within 18 months of making money available to private schools, the Archdiocese of Miami would make darn sure you had an option in Lauderhill. Cardinal Gibbons is in a wealthy part of Fort Lauderdale. That's why. That's the problem. That's the problem. It's not fair that other kids don't have the option of going to Cardinal Gibbons. Not only do they not have access to the money, they don't have access to the geography. It means that the big issues in this district are the issues about which I have cared most about for many, many years, for decades. Criminal justice reform and poverty. You know, what we have done with poverty over the years, well-meaning, but objectively speaking, we have to admit that the war on poverty has not been a uniform success. I would argue it's been a failure. But I don't think there's any argument any longer that says it has been a success. And I believe not only that we need to try a new approach to several aspects of that, we can talk about that, but I do believe that the nature, the style, the basic theme behind the war on poverty is a big reason why we have persistent intergenerational poverty, why so many families cannot escape poverty in the bottom rung of the economic ladder. That part of our economy works very differently than the rest of the economy. The rest of the economy has considerable mobility. You know, we see wealthy people becoming middle class and middle class people becoming wealthy. There's a certain amount of churn. Right? It does not address, in my view, sufficiently the things that cause poverty. On the other hand, it does spend a lot of money. Now, you know, you're gonna have to trust me when I say I think we all wished in, you know, going back 70s, I grew up in the 60s, but becoming politically aware in the 70s and the 80s, we all wish the rising tide would lift all boats, right? And to a certain extent it did. You know, through the Reagan years, for example, when we used to say that, a lot of people did very well and a certain proportion of people did escape poverty. But we have a certain amount of poverty that is just absolutely persistent. No matter how much money we spend, we have found a way to lock families in. I would argue the number one problem is bad schools. You meant the Broward County Public Schools, where I served as a part-time substitute teacher for a couple of years. You can pick up pretty quick that public schools in Broward County are more part of the problem than they are part of the solution. I believe the criminal justice system is a huge problem in terms of propagating poverty from one generation to the next. The war on drugs has been very, very problematic and well-meaning. You know, I'm not suggesting that I would have done anything differently in the 80s or even in 1996. What I am suggesting is that we have learned the hard way that the crime bill in 96 turned out to be a bad idea. Yeah, there were areas where we lowered the crime rate, but it wasn't by much, it wasn't everywhere, and it did lead to huge proportions of incarceration. It led to massive amounts of street crime, breaking up families. We have a serious problem in terms of our prison sentencing. You compare sentencing to the rest of the democratized world, we are not just a leader, we're a dominant player. This is not good for community development. And in particular, specifically, it's very bad for family development. Well, we need to decriminalize weed, and then we need to start decriminalizing other drugs, beginning with stepwise, by the way, stepwise over the years. We need to start with other drugs that are not addictive. I do not believe the American public is ready for anyone to flip a switch and say, do whatever you want, nothing is going to be illegal anymore. I believe that we need to start treating addiction like the health problem it is, rather than a crime problem. I believe that police officers are likely to be always involved in this problem, but taking people to jail is no solution. We are not expecting too much from police officers. I do believe that we expect a lot from police officers. I believe that that's appropriate. When we get called to a domestic dispute is a good example. It comes out as, I'm mad at my husband, come on over and tell him to settle down, right? Now, there are people who would say we should send a counselor out there. If you find a counselor willing to go out there, she or he is too dumb to hire. You need a cop to go out there because I'm telling you, there's a 10% chance that she has underreported the problem, right? Okay, you got to have a cop go in first. All right, now you've got a cop there. Whether that guy was armed or not, whether he's beating her up or not, you've already got the cop there because a cop has to be the first one in. It's too expensive a solution to then say, all right, I see you're settled down. I'm going to leave now and send a counselor over it too. We need much more flexibility in terms of hiring, firing, paying the good ones more, the bad ones less. Politicians have got to be way more involved. I'm not suggesting that all the problem is politicians, but they, in the cases with which I am intimately familiar, they are not picking up the balls that they need to run with. That the way to get around this is to replace qualified immunity with liability insurance. Police officers will eventually, and probably right away, be forced, just to protect their house, be forced to get liability insurance. If you're a liability insurance provider, if you're an insurance carrier, you are not going to be intimidated by a police union. We are going to, if I'm the insurance provider, I need the information I need, right? I need a certain amount of transparency. I need to know how those IA investigations went down. And maybe I don't need every gory detail, but I need the outline. I need the structure. I need to know what's going on, or I'm just not going to provide insurance. That while the war on poverty has problems, has challenges, has things that we need to fix, right? I do believe we're all on the same page in terms of it being an important issue. I don't believe anyone is highlighting it as much as I am because I think it's the issue. But the problem I have with the Democratic candidate is her support for the universal basic income. It is a real problem in reverse order of importance. We cannot afford it as a nation. This is in reverse order of importance, okay? It is badly timed because the research shows that when you give people in poverty money, they work less. And we're trying desperately to get people to go to work. Again, in reverse order of importance, the next one up in terms of importance is that it's just absolutely unethical to take money from one American, give it to another just because you can outvote them. And that brings me to number one, which is that in terms of relieving poverty, it doesn't work. And we have the research that already shows that. And I'm really bothered by the cojones of a politician who will just refuse to avail herself of the research that's been done when this idea has been tried. Not even make the case. She just says it's money for you. And it's for anyone up to $75,000. I got to tell you, I've had a lot of years making less than $75,000. I'm not suggesting that's a tremendous amount of money, right? You eat a lot of macaroni and cheese when you're making $70,000 raising 2 kids. Having said that, I have eaten a lot of macaroni and cheese making $70,000 raising 2 kids. That doesn't mean the government should be giving me $1,000 a month as much as I would love it. As a matter of fact, now I make a lot less money than $75,000 a year. I just don't think it's a good idea. It does not raise people out of poverty. In one study, in one example, this was done in the late 60s, early 70s in 4 or 5 different communities. In one example, for every $3 you gave people, they worked $2 less. In other words, almost all of the money was spent by staying home. What does work, and we know that this works, are better schools, staying out of jail. That's where criminal justice reform comes in. I think we have a huge problem with zoning in the United States. The not in my backyard theory of forcing all multifamily housing into one area and then assigning a school to it. And then we're shocked when it doesn't work out because the crime rates are high. I'm sorry. If you're shocked by this in 2021, shame on you, because the economics profession knows darn well what's going on.